Hello. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Thank, thank you, everyone, for coming out to this presentation on the history of baseball in Billings. We're really excited to offer this presentation. I'm really stoked to listen to it myself. I think it'll be really interesting. My name is Taylor. I'm a reference librarian here at the Billings Public Library. I just help facilitate this program with the help of Matt Schoonover, the assistant general manager over at the Billings Mustangs. He's been there with them about 16 years. He brought some really cool items to check out down in the back here, so be sure you take a look at all of those. Lauren Hunley, she's the community historian over at the Western Heritage Center. She will be giving the presentation today. I'm really excited to hear it and listen. It sounds really interesting, and they both are very knowledgeable. So this will be, I think, a really great time. Lauren's been at the Western Heritage Center for just about 5 years now, so she's seems like a very intelligent person. It'll be great to listen to her. So everyone, thank you, and welcome Matt and Lauren, okay?
All right. Well, it's lovely to see all of you guys here today. I have to take a minute to acknowledge and it's awesome to see as many different teams represented in our gear today. I love that. I'm a huge sports fan, and as a Baltimore Orioles fan, the fact that we are not at the bottom of the league this year means I can finally wear my gear and not have a brown bag over my head. So, full disclosure, we're not going to hit the Mustangs in our presentation until the last third because I want to make sure that we have a full understanding of baseball, its importance to American culture, and why it has such a strong foundation here in Billings. And as a history nerd, when I walked in and saw the scrapbooks that Matt had pulled out from 1948, when the team was established, all the way up through the 70s, I immediately pulled out my cell phone, was taking pictures. He has things that we do not have at the Western Heritage Center. So you're going to see a really great overview today, but I also encourage you to go take a look at some of that awesome stuff too. He's got baseballs, he's got photos that you're going to see here as well. So I'm going to run through it. We're going to have a whirlwind presentation today because we're going to cover about 150 years of baseball, including over 130 years, I'm going to try and do math, almost 150 years of baseball in Billings, and then I'm going to open it up to questions if we have any. Okay? So, welcome to Billings Library. We're going to start with just a general overview of baseball in early America. Baseball, as we would recognize it today, really becomes popular and is recognizable as a game as early as the 1840s. So we're talking before the American Civil War. But it doesn't occur until the 1860s that it really starts gaining popularity. The big reason for that is actually the same reason why American football becomes popular in the late 1860s and early 1870s as well. After the American Civil War, there was this huge fear, the war is over, we will never have another war. How on earth are men going to prove their masculinity? There's no way for us to put them in the army so that they can go have war, because that's how men proved themselves. That's how America established a baseline of understanding for men. And oh, guess what? There's sports. We can use team sports as a substitute for war and for battle, for men to prove themselves on the athletic field the same way that they used to prove themselves on the battlefield. There is a reason today why a lot of sports use war as a metaphor for their play. And so both of these sports become incredibly popular in the wake of the American Civil War, so 1860, late 1860s, early 1870s. It also pairs itself with the late Victorian era here in the U.S. With the Victorian era, I don't know how much you guys know about the Victorian era. They were a little weird, but they also it created the foundation for so many of the traditions and societal expectations that we continue to have today. Things like women should not go out into public unless they have a chaperone. which means they can't go into bars, into saloons, into theaters, and things like that because it's completely unladylike. Well, all of the sports, all of the athletics that were available before the 1870s were all pub sports: bowling, pool, darts. And so there was really no way to have a good spectator base for these sports. Having a dual recognition of allowing and increasing the popularity of spectator sports following the American Civil War pulls people out of those seedier businesses, those seedier areas, mostly because you can't play baseball in a bar. Actually, I'd really like to see you try. And so we pull people out into the public space. It is a much more acceptable space. And so it doesn't take us very long to go from team community sport to, hey, if there are people who are really good at it and can draw a crowd, let's pay them to do it, and then we can charge for tickets, i.e. professional sports. And so the earliest professional baseball team are the New York Excelsiors, whom you see here, circa 1870. 1870, we already have a professional baseball team in the United States. And drawing people into that public space, into a spectator sport, means that we finally have an athletic competition, a team athletic competition that women can watch. Women are now allowed to go into the athletic space. This is really incredibly groundbreaking because before this, if you were a woman and you wanted to participate in sports, you could walk, you could ride a horse, or you could play tennis in 7 pounds worth of clothes. No joke, right? So the fact that a woman can now go into an athletic space accepted with her friends, she does not have to go with another man, she can go with a group of women, completely opens up the concept of sports, athletics, and baseball into a true society entertainment sport. Because now men, women, and children can all be together in the same space. This really opens the door for people across the US to adopt baseball as their go-to Saturday afternoon activity. We have accounts of, farm kids playing out in the cornfields in Idaho, or in Illinois. I guess they have more corn, don't they? We have ranch kids playing out in the cow pastures in Montana. We have kids playing on the beaches in Florida and in Georgia. We have kids playing in tenement alleys in New York, because all you need is space, a stick, and a ball. And so that separates baseball from things like football and tennis that have a much more expensive equipment base, right? If you're going to play football, you need some padding, you need a helmet, you need a special ball, right? If you're going to play tennis, you got to have a special racket, you got to have a special ball, you got to have a net, you have to have all these things. Baseball, you don't need any of that. And so that means it doesn't matter your color, your creed, your gender, your sex, your socioeconomic background, you have access and can play baseball. And because of the democratic approach and the democratic availability of the sport, this is when we see it adopted as America's game, because anybody can play baseball. This means that baseball becomes incredibly popular for immigrant communities, because you don't need a lot of money and you don't need a lot of space to play. And by playing baseball, you're automatically taking part in the most American concept that you can, which can gain you acceptance within the larger American society. But if you're an immigrant, you likely don't speak English, or at least speak it very well, you're more than likely going to be playing on a team with other immigrants, which means baseball simultaneously gains you acceptance into American society, but it also strengthens the language and cultural connections that you have with other immigrants from your community. And we're going to see this not only in teams across the country, but we're also going to see that right here in Billings. Baseball quickly grows across the country. This photograph is taken at a camp outside of Marysville here in Montana. I love the mountains in the background, and it shows, you don't even have to have a flat space to play baseball. You just need a space, right? Stick and a ball. What's really fascinating is that as baseball grows and moves westward, we see its development mirror and even spur city parks development. At the same time, this photograph, is it not dated? This photograph is roughly 1910, 1915. Right at the turn of the century, we see this massive change in how cities plan park spaces. Before the 1900s, the idea was that cities really need green space to provide good quality life opportunities for people living in the city. But it just needs to be a pretty place to walk around. You don't have to do anything there, which is why a lot of cities today, and even in Europe, if anybody goes to Europe and you see a really pretty park, you likely have to pay to get into the park. It's not an open public space. That's just because they need the sustainability of maintaining plants and vegetation. Right around the turn of the century, there is what we call the reform parks movement, and that means, hey, we're going to reform parks and use them for recreational spaces, which means there has to be stuff to do. The most popular thing to do in a park at the time is baseball. So many cities are actually planning their city parks specifically with baseball fields in mind. And it's pushing this entire new movement in city planning. If you're interested in that, we do have some other programs about that. We're not going to go into any more of it here because I understand that city parks planning is not everybody's cup of tea. You guys are here to learn more about baseball. And so this is when we see baseball really become the hallmark of American culture, which means as cities are popping up across the West, baseball is coming right on their heels. So let's look at the first pitch, early teams here in Billings. For those of you who may be in the know, Billings was established in the summer of 1882. The first train comes on our train track in August, early August of that year. By May and June of 1883, there are baseball games in open dirt patches for North and South Park. The very first game we have recorded in Billings is an 1883 game between the Merchants of Minnesota Avenue against the Merchants of Montana Avenue. Minnesota Avenue wins, by the way. So from the very beginning, baseball is a part of Billings. We're talking 6 to 8 months. They put down the first stake, they wait for the snow to blow away, and they have a baseball game. Those earliest parks are planned specifically for baseball fields, just like we talked about. This is what was called the Country Club baseball field, simply because it was roughly in the same area as the building that they wanted to be the country club. Interesting note, it was actually never a country club. But it operated really right there about where North Park is today. This particular photograph is from 1909. So over 100 years ago, we were playing baseball right at the base of the rims. Interestingly enough, the local newspaper carries detailed reports of every game. Local labor unions, community groups, neighborhoods would each have their team, and the printers would play the Barbers, the Northern Pacific office would play the Northern Pacific Expressmen, the Sugar Tramps, we'll see a picture of them in a minute, the Sugar Tramps played the Roundup team, and every single game is detailed by the newspaper. By the way, the North Park field was not around for very long, mostly because the land it was owned by was owned by Austin North. Austin North decided he wanted to sublet the land, and so he got rid of the baseball field and was not a very popular man after he made that decision. As baseball continues to grow across Billings, we see the city start investing in grandstands. This is the baseball field at what was South Park, was the baseball field at South Park. Take a look at those grandstands. They're packed. This is a big deal, guys. We have the entire community emptying out on a Saturday afternoon, and everybody and their brother are at the ball field. Nothing is unifying our community like a baseball game. The 1920s saw more and more fields being added as more and more teams entered the fray. This is the Billings Sugar Company's team. They called themselves the Sugar Tramps. I don't know who picked that name. I feel like they probably could have done better. But here we are, they're playing Rex Laundry, 1915. I'm also pretty sure their manager was allowed to smoke on the field, so. As more and more community teams enter, they actually end up having to split the league into divisions because they have too many teams for everybody to play everybody else. When we hit the 1920s and 1930s, this becomes absolutely vital for the acceptance of some new teams. The photograph here on your left is of the Aztecs baseball team. This team was made up entirely of immigrants from Mexico who were brought in for the sugar beet fields. These immigrants are coming in and they don't speak English. Most of their families are living in company housing called the Colonia, so they're not even living in town. They have to raise money to even build a church that is able to cater to their specific community needs. But here they are able to field a baseball team, and as such, they're able to find acceptance within the larger Billings community. Because, hey, guess what? They were pretty good. They were really good. You also see this is the perfect opportunity for college kids to really kind of flex their muscles, right? It's a great way for them to start building a network professionally. Here we can see the Young Democrats. These were young men from across the city. I want to point out to you guys, though, we see this photograph. These photographs are really fantastic, and as a history nerd, I get super stoked when I see them, but they're in black and white, and that can be a little misleading. These Young Democrats were very flamboyant men, and I can say that with extreme confidence because we have one of their uniforms in our museum collection. I don't know who designed evergreen and bright orange together, but for sure, you would not confuse them on the field with anybody else. And so baseball becomes a way for communities and for teams to find acceptance, to flex their muscles a little bit and prove themselves, but also a way to build their network and to start demonstrating their own individual identities. All of this is wrapped up into a single sport, and all of it is being illustrated right here in Billings for years and years and years. Of course, it continues to grow, and we see the expression and the inclusion of teams from the outlying areas. Joliet, Rambler, Roundup, Miles City, Huntley, Ballantine, Columbus, Bridger. All of these communities put together a baseball team, and they all come into Billings to play Billings teams. And Billings teams will go out and to these other communities. And so here we're expanding the reach of baseball from Billings into the surrounding community around us. You cannot see the continued growth of a community sport like this unless you include every member of the family. There is no way for a sport or any activity to unify a community unless it is available, it offers as equal opportunity as possible to every member of your family. So even though these photographs are all of young men, we do see women and we do see children. For children, most notably, it's the Little League and American Legion teams. Billings becomes a hot spot for Little League and American Legion. Little League, of course, is children under 12. American Legion are teenagers, so 13 through 18. Billings American Legion team becomes state champs starting in the 1930s and then consistently represent themselves on the state and national level through today. One of the reasons for this is because of a single man. His statue is actually in front of Daler Park today, and that's Eddie Bain. Mr. Baseball, as he was known, worked with American Legion teams for decades and really made an impact because he taught the kids baseball, but he also followed their teachers around to check up on their SAT scores or checked in with their parents to make sure they were doing their chores before they came to the game. And he worked with the boys specifically to help them find colleges and scholarships. And under Mr. Baseball, under Eddie Bain's tutelage, we have 4 Billings American Legion players who go on to play for the major leagues. 4 major league players come out of Eddie Bain's baseball program. 36 of his players go on to play minor league baseball or were otherwise affiliated with an MLB team. 40 players end up with professional careers because of American Legion baseball here in Billings and the Eddie Bain. That's pretty cool, right? That's pretty cool. And ladies, please don't think that I'm ignoring you. You know, we recognize the fact that the photographs that we have seen so far are all of men and young boys. And unfortunately, there was a line that women were not allowed to play in the organized leagues. They could watch, which I guess is better than nothing, but they weren't always allowed to play. That does not stop them from pickup games. As we can see our lovely ladies here, they're out playing in their skirts. God bless them. When girls are able to play, we really don't see women playing any kind of ball and stick game until the 1950s in organized sports here in Montana. Softball is in Billings as early as 1909, using the same baseball fields as the other teams, but it was mostly for men. Women are able to start playing co-ed softball, mostly slow pitch, in the 1960s. But women are putting together organized leagues, mostly through schools, as early as the 40s and the 50s. And the team that you see here is from the 1950s, Montana State Champs. We're lucky enough that we are now 51 years into the passage of Title IX, which of course provided equal access for women in athletics. And under Title IX, we are now in the 3rd, maybe the 4th generation of young girls playing Title IX sports. And we're seeing the result of that. The 2022 Billings softball team, traveling team, actually represented the entire state of Montana at the Little League World Softball Series. That's pretty cool. By the way, this team is representing Montana in regionals this summer in California. So here in a couple weeks, I might be able to say the same thing about the 2023 team. If any of you guys are here, we're rooting for you. So then, what does all of this mean for professional sports? What we see is decades upon decades upon decades of an interest in a sport that unifies our community and creates a foundation for professional sports to thrive. As early as 1900, actually, I would even say before that, the 1890s, we already have a semi-pro team here in Billings. Billings is only 20 years old, and we're already playing guys to play baseball for us. Teams included Salt Lake City, Helena, Ogden, Miles City. In 1897, Billings played Miles City. Most of the players on the Billings team were all bachelors who roomed at the same boarding house, made it easy for accountability for them to get themselves back and forth to games and to practices. Excuse me. When they played Miles City, the game followed pre-game activities of a Wild West show, including outlaw horses, wild steer rides, roping tying competitions, hurdle jumping, polo matches, and an attack on a stagecoach. This is the lead up to the baseball game, guys. Of course, it was against our biggest rival, Miles City. Miles City newspapers called Billings the Alkali Flatters. The Billings Gazette rebutted by calling Miles City the Pumpkin Rollers. They were really, really creative, guys. After the game, the Gazette went on to deplore the rowdyism on the field after a player yanked off the catcher's mask and tried to punch him, when another player grabbed the umpire by the throat. They really felt strongly about their baseball, guys. Don't do that today. They'll get thrown out. We also played, what's really fascinating to me is the fact that the semi-pro league, the Valley Baseball League, included teams from Utah. So we're taking advantage of the railroad to pull teams back and forth across state lines. This wasn't just something happening in Montana. The Billings Cowboys actually went on to play Red Lodge, and when they played Red Lodge, crowds of up to 300 people would travel from Billings to Red Lodge to see the game. The little community of Red Lodge would have several thousand people show up to watch that competition. The railroad company ran a special train of 7 coaches that included the Billings Band, and when the train arrived in Red Lodge, more than 500 people were at the station to welcome them. By the way, Billings lost that game. Every time one of these teams travels in, they were known to have fans travel with them. This wasn't just something that you high-fived them on their way out of town and said, hope you guys do well. This was something that people were putting effort and finances and dedication behind. And they would show up in 1901, in 1905, in 1907, wearing sports gear. So all of us today who are showing off our gear, we're in a long, proud tradition of supporting our team, even far away. Oftentimes, cities would completely shut down theater shows, or restaurants and bars would close during the length of a baseball game because nobody wanted to miss it. The first fully professional game, or fully professional league in Billings, was arranged in 1913. The Midland Empire League was actually organized at the Billings Railroad Depot. The photograph that you see here is of those original organizers leaving the depot after signing the paperwork creating the league. It included Billings, Sheridan, Lewistown, and Buffalo. So here we have Wyoming and Montana working together. They capped salaries at $900 a player and added that each team had to have at least 4 local players. It means you couldn't just buy in all of your talent. You had to have at least 4 local boys on your roster. By the way, if we adjust that today, that $900 cap, it would be just about $24,000 today. So it's not a lot of money, but it's enough, right, to play baseball. To show you guys how popular this was, the very first game for the Midland Empire League was scheduled to be played Memorial Day, 1913. So the league is founded in April 1913. Less than a month later, they have their first game. They've got it all set up. They're going to have the governor throw out the first pitch. Members of his cabinet are going to round out the bases. They've got the field set up for something like 10,000 people to come and watch. The pregame show proved so popular that the railroad had to schedule special trains to bring people in. Does anybody know what the pregame show was? Those of you who have been to Western Heritage Center programs before, you're going to kick yourself. It's the very first airplane trip in Montana history. So Dr. Frank Bell, whose office was actually just downtown here, pulls out his flying crate, as he called it, and takes off from North Park and flies to Park City. his airplane ride as the pregame entertainment to the baseball game, was the first airplane flight in Montana history. And what does that say about Montana, and what does that say about Billings, that this wasn't the main show? The baseball game is what everybody was coming to see. And the baseball game is what brings the governor and his cabinet in from Helena. Now, unfortunately, the Middle Empire League does not last very long because they did not manage it well. Just because you have interest isn't enough, guys. You got to be able to manage the business side of professional sports. So unfortunately, it's only around for several years. And Billings just kind of makes do with the community teams that had been our bread and butter for decades, until Billings boy Robert Cobb makes a call. So Robert Cobb, Bob Cobb, was originally from Billings. His family had actually owned a restaurant here. He goes to Hollywood and opens his own restaurant. By the way, anybody like Cobb salad? This is the guy. No joke. We can go into that later if you want to know how he invented the Cobb salad. Bob Cobb was actually an investor and co-owner in the he was vice president, of the Hollywood Stars Professional Baseball Club. He loved baseball. Of course, he grew up in Billings. He had played baseball here, and he wanted to find a way to connect professional baseball back to his beloved hometown. He knew that Billings could support this. And so he made a call and found the interest here in Billings. Archie Cochran was one of his biggest supporters on this end. And then he makes phone calls to some of his best friends in Hollywood and encourages them and convinces them to invest in a Billings team. So people like Bing Crosby, right? Barbara Stanwyck, Robert Taylor, Randolph Scott, Cecil B. DeMille. Our Billings Mustangs today exist because of the guy who sings White Christmas. That's pretty cool. Bob Cobb was wired in 1947, and his wire said, Hollywood Baseball Club definitely interested in installing a professional team in Billings, provided the city is acceptable to the Pioneer League. Well, I would say they were pretty acceptable because over 1,000 suggestions for a team name was submitted. And to narrow it down, 1,000? The votes came in at over 3-1 for the Mustangs. In order to anchor the team and marketing to this city, they chose to call it the Billings Mustangs. Robert Cobb went on to then donate more than $20,000 to expand the stadium at Athletic Park, which was then renamed Cobb Field. And so that created, now we have a baseball team, we have interest, we have a name, now we need a place to play. He puts up $20,000 of his own money to create a stadium that we still use today. In order to acknowledge and thank those Hollywood investors, Bing Crosby accepts the appointment as the honorary chair of the board of directors, although he never came to watch a game. I don't know what his problem was. 1948 was our opening season. Only 17 players on the roster, but they finished in last place. However, by 1949, which is the photograph that you see here, they made the playoffs, and thus started years upon years of success. By the way, as with any good fan base, Billings had their own crazy group. They called themselves the Animals, and they were known to run around with a giant stuffed gorilla. And at least once at every game, the announcer's booth would call for a famous celebrity. We would like to think the celebrity was there. And the Animals would always meet whoever the person was at the booth, hooting and hollering and grunting just like gorillas. Call themselves the Animals. The opening season in 1948 netted $3,358. So even from the very beginning, we were making money on the Mustangs. We were supporting the team. If we were to adjust that today, they would have netted $80,000. By the 1950 season, so just 2 years later, they netted over $7,500, which would be nearly $100,000 today. So just growth from the very beginning. By 1956, the team was considered to be the best baseball team in the Northwest. They were affiliated with the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Pittsburgh Pirates before their connection with the Cincinnati Reds in 1974. The team would go on to win 15 league titles. I'm going to check in with Matt. 15 league titles, including back-to-back seasons in 1972 and 1973. By the way, in 1961, the Cardinals team came to Billings to host an exhibition game. We lost. But we were basically treated to a home run derby. And it was from that game that several Mustangs players were called up over the next 2 to 3 years. Numerous major league stars have begun their career here in Billings. These include George Brett, Reggie Sanders, Trevor Hoffman, Danny Tartabull, Aaron Boone, Adam Dunn, B.J. Ryan. In 2019, the 2019 season marked the 46th consecutive year that the Mustangs had a connection with the Cincinnati Reds. It was one of the longest running player development relationships in professional baseball across the world. Of course, today, the Pioneer League has been reorganized and the Mustangs operate as an independent ball club. And so, from the beginning, baseball has been a part of Billings as a way to unify our community for all members of our community, regardless of who you are, what you do, or what you look like. Baseball was a way that you could join the rest of our city. And let's be honest, it's not going away. We've got a whole nother season, and I am stoked for our next season of baseball. All right. So guys, thank you very, very much. I appreciate the time that you have spent with me today. I will open the floor to any questions that you might have. Yes?
How do the Scarlets fit into this timeline?
Scarlets.
The baseball team in town.
Legion.
Oh, it's a Legion team.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. I'm like, Scarlet? Legion team. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
Was there any Black or Native American teams?
The question was if there are any Black or Native American teams. We do not have a record of an all-Black baseball team. However, Billings had an incredibly vibrant, thriving Black American community historically. It's my understanding that there were several community-based teams that had Black American players, but I don't know, I don't have evidence as yet, as a historian, that that community had their own team, like we see the Mexican Aztecs. We see a lot of community-based teams like the Aztecs, specifically with immigrant communities, communities that tend to have a language barrier with other teams in the area. It's much more difficult for somebody who doesn't speak English to play on an English-speaking team. Whereas the barbers, the janitors, the school district put together a team, and they could pool Black American and Native American players. Baseball was never really a big piece for Native players in Billings. Of course, they would play on the reservation. Most Native athletes tended to lean more towards basketball. I do have, let me go back just for a minute. This is the 1949 Mustangs team. We have Eddie, right up there. So we do have a Black American player on the Mustangs teams, really from the beginning. Interestingly enough, side note, while Billings never had segregation and specific minority communities on the books, on the city ordinances, there was social pressure that forced people of color to live together in like-minded communities south of the railroad tracks. So even though Eddie was here to play baseball and was actually making pretty good money, social pressure meant that he had to live on the south side of the tracks. He was never able to own a home by the ball field like his teammates. Yes, sir.
Couple of quick comments. When the Mustangs were first organized, you had a picture up there of Archie Cochran, who was the first president, I think, of the board. And what a lot of people don't know is that Archie's older brother was Mickey Cochran, one of the all-time best catchers in baseball history. Mickey won 2 world championships with Philadelphia and then one with Detroit. So he ended his career at Detroit, and when he was in Detroit, he got to know the executives at the Ford Motor Company, and he helped negotiate a new dealership in Billings, which was then owned by his younger brother Archie. So that's how we got Archie
And
Cochran.
then Archie is the local stakeholder for the Billings Mustangs. So we would not have the Mustangs without Archie Cochran, and Archie Cochran would not have had the impact without his brother, the baseball star.
One more quick Archie story. Archie and his wife Roz had 5 daughters, one of whom was a classmate of mine and my wife's in high school. Her name is Katie, who many of you may know. And Katie tells a story about being at the Billings airport. This was after her uncle Mickey had retired. They were at the Billings airport. I don't know if they were coming or going. And Mickey said to little Katie, who was quite young at the time, "You see that big guy sitting over there? You should go say hello to him. He's a good friend of mine." So Katie did that, and the man hoisted her up onto his lap and talked to her, and then Katie went back to her uncle, and Uncle Mickey said, "Do you know who that man is?" She said, "No." He said, "That's Babe Ruth."
Should I share my story?
Can we expand on
We
that?
have a really cool Babe Ruth story. You want to say it? Or
It was 1947, probably. My grandmother, her great-grandmother from Baker, Montana, followed Babe Ruth into the men's bathroom at the airport, and we have his autograph.
He died in 1948.
1948.
He was
very-
traveling with a male nurse at the
Yeah,
time.
he was very, very ill at the time.
Mickey Cochran, in retirement, owned a guest ranch in the Beartooth, and we think that Babe was coming to be a guest at that ranch.
Well, I think he went to the park because I think one of the Legion teams had won the World Series or something, and he handed autographed baseballs to all the boys.
So baseball
believe.
brings us together, guys.
Yeah.
Right?
That's hilarious.
Any other questions here? Yes, yes.
Did they have segregated seating at Cobb Field?
Not to our knowledge, no. Billings and segregation is a very complicated story that we don't really have a lot of time to go into. To my knowledge, there was no segregated seating outside of general admission versus grandstand seating. We do know that there were other businesses, spectator-based businesses in town that would have segregated seating, but most of that segregation is really kind of gone by the 1920s. And of course, Mustangs come in the late 1940s. Billings had a fully integrated elementary school by 1940. Garfield School was fully integrated. There were other challenges, like that's not to say we fixed all the problems. That's not to say at all. But by the 1940s, for the most part, segregation was not something that was on the books here in Billings. You did still have social pressure, but with a ticket-based component, you went and sat where your ticket was. That's a great non-answer, right? Any other questions?
How'd you get a Cobb salad?
Do you guys want to hear about the Cobb salad?
Yeah.
So the story goes, Bob Cobb owned the Brown Derby restaurants in LA, which was the place to go if you were a Hollywood person. Story goes is that after one of his late nights, he was incredibly hungry. The kitchen had already shut down. So he went back into the kitchen and just started throwing stuff together out of the refrigerator and took it out and sat down with some of his Hollywood friends. And now I can't remember the name, but one of his friends saw the salad and was incredibly impressed with it, got a craving for it, and went back to the Brown Derby and asked for Cobb salad that he had the other night. Well, it wasn't on the menu, so the waiter had to go track down Bob to figure out what he had put on the salad. And that is the legendary, although the Derby considers it documented, the Brown Derby restaurant considers it documented, but that is the establishment of the Cobb salad. At the Western Heritage Center, we always joke that the quintessential Billings meal is a Cobb salad, a steak, and Rocky Road ice cream. And the Rocky Road ice cream is because Joseph Oliver Eady, who invented Rocky Road, his first sweet shop was right down here on Broadway Avenue. So I'm down if you guys want steak, Cobb salad, and Rocky Road tonight. So even that connects to baseball. Yes, sir.
Only 3 more games.
I know. Season's almost over. It's going to be great. Go now if you haven't. Any other questions? Yes, sir. What year? The Billings Mustangs has always fielded a good team. Always fielded a good team. I have in my notes, I don't have it have the date right off my hand, but at some point the Cincinnati Reds were playing and they were fielding 8 former Mustangs players. 8 former players coming from Billings was playing on the Cincinnati Reds. If you want to talk stats, Matt's the guy to talk to.
What was the original question?
Sorry, original question was who was the best player to ever play for the Mustangs?
Oh, it was, I mean, depends on if you're asking specifically for like as a Mustang or as a professional
player. Are you
baseball.
talking batting average? Or
Just in
right?
general, probably one of the books that I have over here is from the 1978 season, and that was the year that Gary Reedus set the professional baseball record with a .462 batting average for the entire season. So if you want to talk about maybe like as a Mustang, you look at somebody like that. Even in those early teams in 1949, 1950, Larry Shepard was a player manager at that time, and Larry Shepard was a very good minor league pitcher during that era. If you're talking more as probably a Hall of Fame type career, probably George Brett would be the guy that was the best Major League Baseball player
for sure
that came from
well, and you had mentioned Larry Shepard. In the 1949 season, they had only 17 players. And so they had a player manager who was Larry Shepard. Shepard would go on to coach the Pittsburgh Pirates and was a Cincinnati Reds pitching coach by the 1970s. So even though he was a great minor league pitcher, he never really played much at the majors, but went on to have an incredibly illustrious career as a coach. And he got that coaching start as a player manager here with the Mustangs.
Cool story about the manager from 1948. His name was Charlie Root. He was a former Major League pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. Speaking of Babe Ruth, the 1932 World Series is the year that Babe Ruth supposedly called his shot during the World Series and hit the home run. Charlie Root was the pitcher that gave up that home run.
Don't know if that's the point of history you want. That's your mark of history. All right, guys. Any other questions?
I'd be remiss, just a side note, if we didn't mention the colleges that played baseball here in Billings as well.
Absolutely.
So 1974 was the year that Eastern Montana dropped baseball. And then I know this because in 2005, I was part of the first recruiting class when MSUB started their baseball program again. So
early years, Polytech and normal school did not technically have organized teams. It wasn't until later, of course, that we ended up with Rocky Mountain College and then MSU that brings that college athletic component to town. But those college athletes, even if they didn't play for a school team, they still put together teams like we saw the Young Democrats here. Most of those guys were college kids. So college sports absolutely have a role in this story. But when we're talking about community unity and organized league play, most of that anchored here in Billings would have been the community leagues, the semi-pro, and then the professional leagues as well. But thank you, Matt. I appreciate. You can't ignore the college kids, guys. Okay. Well, thank you guys very, very much. I am available if you have other questions. But enjoy the season.